Time now for an in-depth look at the market action this afternoon, and for that I'm joined on the line by Dr. Jun-sok, professor of economics at the Catholic University of Korea. Professor Yang, thank you for coming on.
Happy to be here.
Well, U.S. stocks were up overnight despite all that's going on, the coronavirus spreading so fast in the U.S. and the tensions with China. Here in Korea, the KOSPI went down right at the end of the session. What's the story in the markets today?
Okay, well, the U.S. markets, as you mentioned, were up for most of this week. It seems that the market is taking good news, weighing it more than the bad news. As you mentioned, there has been record high on coronavirus infection rates and the concerns that the coronavirus recession will be longer than anticipated. But then there were also some good news that the markets were evaluating highly. The consumer confidence numbers came up higher than expected, and some financial regulations, the Volcker rule, which prohibits investment banks from doing both investment and advising activities, that regulation is loosening up. So that good news seemed to be outweighing the bad news, and it's gotten to an extent that the Bank of International Settlements have issued a concern saying that the real economy and the financial sector seem to be decoupling. In other words, it's concerned that there may be signs of a bubble. Now, European markets, they seem to be holding steady, even though United Kingdom went a little bit down. Japan is also holding steady. The Chinese market, the Shanghai market and Hong Kong markets are closed today because of a holiday, but still Shanghai was up yesterday, and Hong Kong, after falling for a week, there was a slight rise yesterday, and KOSPI, as you mentioned, after a rise throughout this week, there was a slight fall today. KOSDAQ, again, after a rise this week, it fell a bit today. Those are attributed to concerns about U.S. China trade friction increasing.
Yes, and in reference to that, the U.S. is stepping up diplomatic, economic pressure on China with Beijing passing this new national security law for Hong Kong. So it's taking away some of Hong Kong's trade privileges, for example. What do you see down the road in terms of U.S.-China relations?
Okay, well, it's very flexible because there's at least 4 different types of interest groups in the United States trying to affect how U.S. should interact with China. The first group is the one that's getting most press in Korea, which are the China hawks. These consist mostly of defense people in defense and some diplomats who argue that China should be controlled and restrained on the basis of worries about the Chinese and American hegemony, that China will set up an alternate world order. Now, this is getting a lot of attention in Korea, but in the U.S., I think it still forms a minority of groups that are dealing with China. The second group is what I would call China cautionaries. They believe that China plays unfair in economics and in international relationship issues. So China needs to play on the same level playing ground as the U.S., and it needs to follow the global rules. These are mostly U.S. politicians in the Democratic Party and some businessmen. And then the third group is the pro-China group. They want to get into the Chinese market because it will soon be the largest market in the world. These obviously are mostly businessmen. And then the final group, which adds a lot of uncertainty, is President Trump. President Trump's chief concern about China seems to be how it will affect his re-election. And that means, depending on how it may affect his re-election, he may become a China dove or a Chinese hawk. He may decide to go soft on China to maintain the trade agreement that he made earlier this year, or he may decide to go tough and play along with the China hawks. But that depends, I think, on how it will affect his re-election chances. And in the short run, at least, the most powerful element is probably how President Trump will react. So basically, the China relationship with the United States in the short run will depend on how it plays into President Trump's reelection chances. But in the longer run, probably the China cautionaries will take the leading role, but that assumes that President Trump is not elected.
And just briefly, Professor, what does all this mean for Korean companies in particular?
Okay, well, in the terms of real exports, the items, industries, for semiconductors, there's a lot of concern. But even if the conflict moves the production base from China to some other country, Korea can sell semiconductors to that production center. It's just that Korean firms have to move fast enough so that they can switch the export destination. Where it'll probably hurt Korea more is trying to get payments out of China, because a lot of times the payment is made through Hong Kong because it's such a big financial center, but that might be affected if the United States decides to put harsh restrictions on international financial transactions going through China. And then there are some concerns that perhaps, depending on what kind of measures United States puts in, Hong Kong may not be able to keep its fixed exchange rates, but we will have to see how what the U.S. reactions will be going down the road.
All right, Professor, thank you so much for sharing your insights today. We appreciate it.
Thank you.